Hello, and welcome back to my vlog. Today we're going to be talking about vibe coding 101. Vibe coding has been all the rage recently, and it's basically using AI tools to help you code to some capacity. And I recently spent about 2 weeks vibe coding an app, so I'm going to show you how I did it as a non-technical person, and also all of the learnings that I had that you can apply to potentially vibe code any apps that you want to create. So for context, my name is Catherine. I'm the founder of Anja Health, and we help pregnant parents freeze stem cells from their umbilical cords and placenta to use for future disease treatment in the family. But I've been hacking on some side gigs because, fun fact, I actually am stepping down as CEO of Anja Health, and I'm going to do another video on why later. But in the meantime, I've been exploring vibe coding and such, and wanted to discuss my learnings related to that. So today's video was originally going to be a part of my most recent day in the life vlog, but I actually decided to just make it an entirely separate vlog on how to vibe code effectively and properly, and give you a little walkthrough on the inputs that I did in order to create a few apps that I was working on. Basically, I'm going to take you through what I did each day and what my priorities were and my learnings, and then hopefully it can help you vibe code an app better as well. So on day one, I brainstormed what features there should be, and I prioritized those features. And I think it's really important to remember that although vibe coding has the promise of creating a really prolific app in a short period of time, it's still best practice to abide by creating the most MVP that you can, because you don't want to spend a lot of time getting in the weeds with vibe coding in order to create a really, really complicated app, when in reality you could probably test your thesis around what app will work with way less features. So this is a common example that I use, but one of my friends, his MVP for a fintech app was actually just a spreadsheet, and then his friends Venmoing him to invest through the app in a way. And then he would make the investments on their behalf. He was actually technical, but he just felt like that was the easiest and fastest way to test the MVP that he wanted. And I feel like that kind of example is a really good idea of how to get a scrappy MVP together, so that you're not spending all this time building out features that you may not even need later on. Then on day two, I basically picked the name of the app, bought the domains, and then I split up the engineering tasks into front end and back end. So you can see here kind of all of my inputs for the final front end that I felt really good with. So this was the final app. It was called Daily Verse, your daily scripture. You had today's verse. I also wanted to be able to store past verses. You could sign in to view that. And the idea was that you would start getting a paywall if you wanted to receive more than 3 texts over 3 days. And you also had to face a paywall if you wanted to view your history of verses. And then if you could study the verses and there were suggested questions, if you wanted to save the study session, you would face a paywall. And also if you had more than 3 inputs studying this, then you would also face paywall. Then on day 2, I basically picked the name of the app, bought the domains, and then I split up the engineering tasks into front end and back end. So I think Lovable is really good for your front end, and then for your back end, you can basically have Lovable start helping you craft the back end, but you will want to use things like Cursor and ChatGPT in order to help supplement and create your back end, and in order to create API connections as well. So for instance, for my app, I was trying to vibe code an app that basically allowed you to get daily Bible verses, and you could sign up for notifications to get these daily Bible verses. So I asked ChatGPT, like, what are all of the technical steps that I need to do this? And it told me that I would need to connect to Bible API, also probably a Twilio, in order to receive phone numbers and then send out text messages. And so connecting to those APIs kind of formulated the back end. And I had to ask ChatGPT what those were in order to do it. And I also had to ask ChatGPT for a step-by-step breakdown in order to connect my Lovable front end to those back ends. And the reason that you can't just stick to Lovable is because Lovable is kind of constrained to creating the app within Lovable. So whenever you're telling Lovable to make an app do certain things like, oh, I want to collect phone numbers, etc., it's not going to go outside of Lovable to connect to Twilio in order to send out text messages, because it just doesn't have the capability. And also, when you try to fix bugs within Lovable, it always assumes that the bug is within Lovable. So Lovable basically just exists in the world of Lovable, when in reality, most apps require some external resources as well, or personal coding knowledge, so that you can create all of this. But I have basically maybe like 1 out of 10 technical knowledge. This was something that I came to realize as I was seeing how Lovable was building out apps. Okay, on day 3, this was a big learning day because I actually met up with my friend who's technical. If you remember a couple of vlogs ago, I met up with my friend who wanted us to onboard to their payment processor, and he helped me vibe code. So the big learnings of that day, number 1, you have to have a server. I feel like I'm gonna sound so stupid talking about this, but if you're not technical, this is a good learning. So this serves data to the front end, and then you need a back end, which could be a database in addition to the other APIs that you're connecting to. In Lovable's case, they have a partnership with Supabase, so that was the automatic database that I was using. They also have a SQL editor that you can use, or if ChatGPT tells you to build out certain things within the database, then you can basically ask ChatGPT to create the SQL code and just input that into the SQL editor so that you don't have to manually go through and build out all of these things within Supabase, and you can build the database that way. My ChatGPT input, so things like I was asking it like, what's an SDK? I was trying to figure out like all of the different pieces that I needed. Also, Supabase Lovable API setup. This was something that was complicated. Even though Lovable has this integration with Supabase, there were still pieces. So things like I use a service role key and input it into Lovable. I want to use that one, but I put it into Lovable and now the app isn't loading. So I learned the service role key should not be used in Lovable front end because it's very sensitive information to automatically input your service role key since it's a security error. So then it was explaining to me the logic behind the errors that I was encountering and how to fix them. So you basically have to talk back and forth between the AIs in order to get what you're looking for. And that's what I really learned. Also, you need things like authentication. You can do things like OTP, which you'll need Twilio. OTP is the texting to receive the number type situation. You can also do Google authentication, which is a common one. So these are data points that affiliate the customer to the customer themselves. And so because of all of these learnings that I had around like what a server is, I realized that you need a little bit of technical knowledge in order to set up infrastructure, or you need beforehand to ask ChatGPT to tell you the high level basics as a non-technical person, what you need in order to set up the app that you want. And then ChatGPT can tell you what elements you need, what you can get from Lovable, and what you can get elsewhere. Okay, then I essentially also played around with Firebase and CAPTCHA to set up a database. Then I realized that Supabase was actually just more well equipped to being integrated with Lovable because of their partnership, and they try to make it as no code as possible for you to do that. So I just came to the conclusion that we should just be using Supabase. So I did not use Firebase for the database. And a database, if you think about it, is basically like a Google Sheet or Airtable that holds all of your data. So it's just a base for your data. And the server serves the database data. So on this day that I was learning all of these things, I then asked ChatGPT, like, what are all of the, basically like, if you were to fill in the blank, every app needs a XYZ. I asked ChatGPT those things so that I knew what to tell Lovable to make and what to get from other parts. And so then one of the other parts that I needed was the Twilio account to link to the Supabase, so that phone numbers could be texted from our Twilio account and that we could collect numbers and all these things. I had a lot of issues setting up the authentication. It was really hard for me. And at a certain point, I kind of felt like I was running in circles, even with ChatGPT's help. And so I think in these instances, moving to things like Cursor that move a lot faster and have more technical knowledge is better for fixing bugs. And if you can also just get in the mindset of intellectual curiosity and constantly asking ChatGPT questions of not only how to build step by step whatever it is that you want to build, but asking ChatGPT as well, like, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? It helped me to learn about the CS principles as I was building the app, so that I could properly know what I was doing and kind of act as like the brain behind the AI, so that I knew what to prompt the AI in order to get the response that I needed. At some point, I had to like open a terminal and download node.js. I downloaded Homebrew, and I had to like do all of these things to get the server stood up and whatever. It was getting really complicated. So I just actually decided to scrap the app on this day and start from scratch, because I made the mistake of not asking ChatGPT beforehand what are all the steps that I needed. This is at the point that I realized like, oh, Lovable exists in the Lovable world, and I need to like exist outside the Lovable world and see Lovable for what it is, which is front-end development. If you're not technical, you need external tools for sure. I was also recommended Replit at this time, a Replit agent, and also a lot of YouTube videos So essentially, a Replit agent uses AI to set up and create apps from scratch, and people recommended using Replit in addition to Lovable. Replit is more of a hands-off tool, whereas Cursor is more like hands-on, which includes code completion, error detection. It's not totally clear to me what the difference is because I ultimately did not use Replit because other people told me to use Cursor. But I really think that the golden trifecta of vibe coding is Cursor, ChatGPT, or actually Perplexity, on the other hand, people told me is more friendly for coding. But I have always stored everything in ChatGPT, so I'm feeling a little bit of friction to changing to Perplexity. So that's why I stuck to ChatGPT. But anyways, the golden trifecta is for sure Lovable, Cursor, Perplexity. So Perplexity to tell you what you're building and what steps you need to take and be kind of the overarching mastermind and the project manager behind what you're doing. Lovable for the front end and to connect to the database, and then Cursor to help you fix bugs and connect to anything external that you might need for the back end in addition to the database. For instance, Twilio. So then on day 4 and day 5, I was basically going back and forth between Lovable and ChatGPT saying, okay, I just did this. Now, how do I do the next step? What is required in order to do the next thing? Why do you think this bug is happening? I was essentially always trying to get in the mind of the code and understand truly why things that were happening, because I felt like as I was able to grasp more pieces as to what was tangibly unfolding before me, I could get a better sense of the logic and kind of become the project manager myself rather than relying on ChatGPT/Perplexity to be the mastermind behind the project. Quick editor's note, I was also chatting with my friend yesterday who's been vibe coding. She actually is technical, and she told me that an additional tip that she would add to my tutorial would be in the beginning when you're first telling ChatGPT to give you a checklist of all of the things that you want in your app, you should actually tell ChatGPT to give you a PRD, aka product requirements document. And I think that that is basically a more formal framework for what I was recommending. I was basically recommending that you have to be the brain behind the app and get the AIs to talk to each other. But the best way to think about it is you have to become the product manager, and then the vibe coding tools are your software engineers and designers and such. But you can start with the PRD, which I think was a good tip. So you can see I was kind of working through like various bugs. For instance, like I needed to set the time at 9 a.m. local time zone. Can we adjust it? I would basically go back and forth with ChatGPT and ask it, like, how can I frame the ask to Lovable so that it properly fixes it? Sometimes, like, if there was an error, I would then show the error to ChatGPT and ask it, like, what should I say back to Lovable? So it was a lot of the AIs talking back and forth from one another. And then ultimately on day 6, I was able to come to a slightly better conclusion. So I got the front end to a spot that I was really happy with on Lovable, and I got Supabase set up, and I was still having trouble with Twilio. It required a few days to set up and be certified and such. And then gradually I was realizing that this like initial project manager vision that I had ChatGPT set up, I needed to have written as a checklist so that I could gradually circle back. After I went down rabbit holes of fixing bugs, I could circle back to different steps and ask ChatGPT, like, okay, I finished this and this and this. I'm revisiting this. This is the ultimate goal for what I'm going to build. So can you tell me the step-by-step plan for how to execute on the next step that you told me to do? And then I would also use ChatGPT image generation to come up with ideas and images for the various scenes that I was going to post. And then you can see here, I actually did start posting. So we now have 74 followers, and this was just about a week of posting. So we had like some get like 21K views, and I was basically, these are literally, every single one of these is AI generated. And I had this thesis that if you have enough hot Jesuses, it could go viral. So I was testing that thesis here. Then I was testing kind of like little graphics. Ultimately, informationals clearly was like the best one, and also really striking verses. So this one is like how to read the Bible. So that's more informational. Bible verses I think you need, and kind of like affirmations related to the Bible I found were the best performing content. So I kind of stopped posting after a little bit because this was really just kind of a 7-day project. But I think this, and then also using the same ad I posted on Instagram. Lastly, I will show you. Okay, then on day 7, I connected the domains. I set up a little support email. But then at a certain point, I was kind of like, why am I even doing all this stuff? Like, really, the best MVP that I could create for this is a newsletter that sends out daily Bible verses. And I could just eventually paywall the newsletter, and then it could become this whole app situation. So anyways, I eventually came to the conclusion that I should just take my own advice and create the most minimum viable product that I can. And so that's what I did. I launched a newsletter. We had an Instagram and a TikTok account up, and I tested some AI generated content on those accounts using the principles of my How to Grow in Social Media video to create the content. And then I got the app to like a good enough place, I feel like. Then ultimately, like I said, I just decided to create a newsletter. So here's the final newsletter that I made. Basically, you can subscribe and then you would automatically receive an email. Okay, so you can see this was the welcome email that I set up. The subject was today's Bible verse, and this essentially became the MVP for what I wanted for the product. So you can see here, this is actually something that I also produced with using ChatGPT, and I did edit it slightly to make it more contemporary, like verses, and also more contemporary explanations. But this was kind of the idea for what I wanted it to provide. These are all of the premium features, and you could automatically upgrade to premium. This linked out to a payment processor payment link. So I didn't want to get too complicated in terms of finding some kind of embedded like Stripe button on a custom page, blah, blah, blah. This was just like truly the most minimum viable product that I could think of. It wasn't perfect for sure, and I wasn't even aware of the market's demand for this kind of app, which I really should have been aware of, because that would have helped inform the feature decisions that I was making, and maybe the vibe coding wouldn't have gotten so complicated if I had simpler features. But I just got so caught up in the excitement and the promise that vibe coding can really give you the app that you want. And I figured it would be really easy to execute on that, but I think you should still abide by the principles of creating the most minimum MVP that you can. So yeah, those are my learnings of vibe coding an app for 7 days. And I will link the app, the social media accounts, and our newsletter below in the description so that you can see. Because I'm continuing to work on my company, obviously, Anja Health, I decided to abandon this, but it was a fun little pet project to see how vibe coding worked. So make sure to like and subscribe for more startup content. Thanks for watching.